You're tuned into the Spot Up Pod, the official podcast of the Spot Up Shot newsletter. I'm your host, Paul Garcia. In today's episode, the latest on the Kevin Durant trade situation as of Sunday evening. Looking into other trade rumors surrounding the Spurs. An initial look at a few free agents and trade players who fit with the Spurs. All right, so I want to note that I am recording this on a Sunday evening, so if anything changes, this is why as I dive into this video. First of all, let's go back to Saturday evening. Here were the latest reports. Shams Charania of ESPN reported that the Spurs, Rockets, and Miami Heat are on Durant's 3 preferred destinations. The Athletic also reported that Durant wants to end up in either San Antonio or Houston. This echoes what Arizona sports radio host John Gambadoro has been saying all week, that Durant wants to end up in Texas either with the Houston Rockets or San Antonio Spurs. And then also that, as Gambo said before, the Spurs are Durant's preference. Now, according to this reporting from Shams, the Suns, though, are going to make the best decision for their franchise, even if it's not on one of those 3 preferred teams where Durant wants to end up. All right, so going into the weekend, it did sound like the Minnesota Timberwolves might have been the favorites to land Durant. However, as the evening started to draw closer, it looked like Minnesota's name started to drop off a little bit because of the situation where Durant came out through public reports and said that he only wants to sign a long-term extension with either San Antonio, Houston, or Miami. So for the Wolves' perspective, that's a lot to give up in terms of they're taking a risky gamble to give up a lot for Durant, and then to not even have a guarantee that he's going to stay there for more than 1 year. So when I say about giving up a lot, it probably takes Rudy Gobert, their defensive anchor, maybe somebody like Dante DiVincenzo, or someone like Julius Randle. However, Randle, it's even hard to put him in a trade right now because he has a player option decision he needs to decide on first before that can even take place. So again, there's a lot of factors in the Minnesota case. I know there's also been reporting that they don't want to include Jaden McDaniels in a trade either for Durant. So again, that's why Minnesota's name starts to kind of fall off a little bit, I would say, based on some of the reporting out of Minnesota on Saturday night. John Krasinski, who writes for The Athletic, and Chris Hine, who writes for the Minnesota Star Tribune, they both reported that talks weren't close anymore between the Wolves and Durant. However, I do want to say, right before I jumped on this podcast episode, Tim Bontemps of ESPN did say that some teams are still monitoring Minnesota as a team who could possibly still have interest in Durant out there. But again, as of Saturday evening, it looked like the Wolves' chances for Durant were starting to fall off a little bit. There could still be some wildcard teams out there, like maybe someone, I know that a name that's been frequent is the Los Angeles Clippers or the Toronto Raptors. But again, just like Minnesota, those teams too are taking a big gamble on, having to put a big package together for Durant when there's no guarantee he's staying for more than 1 year. So I think that's the interesting question to watch is, how much are teams maybe lessening their offers for Durant, knowing teams outside of the Spurs, Rockets, and Heat, knowing that he may not stay there for another, for more than one season. So maybe what they're willing to do, those other teams out there those packages might start to be even less and less going forward with that news that Durant wants to only sign with one of those 3 teams, the 2 Texas teams or Miami. So now, if Phoenix can only get the best offers from either San Antonio, Houston, Miami, I do want to look at some packages maybe those teams can take a look at and put together. So I'm going to go through each team, kind of what's been reported, maybe that they're willing to give up, or players or et cetera that Phoenix, that has been a trade conversation. So for the Spurs, on Saturday, Jake Fisher of the Steinline reported that the Suns are not enamored with the Spurs' players being offered so far in talks. Some players like Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson, and Harrison Barnes. This week, Gambo, he did say that he thinks is the key word here, that Phoenix wants either Stephon Castle, the reigning Rookie of the Year, or the second pick in the NBA draft. And of course, it's been reported by multiple outlets that the Spurs are not going to include Castle or the second pick, who is expected to be Dylan Harper, in any kind of Kevin Durant trade negotiation. So again, Castle and the second pick look like they're off the table. So again, Phoenix doesn't really like the packages that maybe the San Antonio's initially offering, which might be like, again, Vassell, Keldon, Barnes, the 14th pick, etc. The Rockets, Kelly Iko on Saturday had a report regarding the Rockets. He writes for The Athletic that Houston's kind of very hesitant right now to break up their core that got them, the second seed out west this past season. And so when I say breaking up the core, I mean to get a Durant deal done, the Rockets probably have to include two of three rotation players from Houston that were on the team last year, such as Dylan Brooks, Jalen Green, and Jabari Smith Jr. Now, Ico does report that the Suns do have interest in Jabari Smith Jr., but again, and the Rockets regarding draft capital, they do have the 10th pick in this upcoming draft in a week, and they also have some of Phoenix's future first-round picks. So again, that's kind of what the Rockets have, but again, we don't know exactly who they're putting on the table in trades, but getting Durant would require Houston to lose 2 of those 3 players in either Dillon Brooks, Jalen Green, or Jabari Smith Jr. If everyone else, regarding like Alfred Şengün, Ahmed Thompson, if those players are off the board, then yeah, those are the players that they have to look at in trades is Brooks, Green, and Smith Jr. Now, from the Heat, they probably, as far as like impact players now, they don't have the level of players that Phoenix would get from Houston or San Antonio, like a Devin Vassell or like a Jalen Green. But let me just talk about what the Heat probably have to offer in kind of trade scenarios. So they do have sizable contracts, players like Andrew Wiggins, Terry Rozier, and Duncan Robinson to get a Durant package together. They also have some young prospects in Nikola Jovic, Kel'el Ware, and Jaime Hawkins Jr. Plus, they're going to have the 20th pick via the Warriors this year, which is obviously not as good as the Spurs' 14th pick or Houston's 10th pick. And they have future first-round picks that can be traded, according to Bobby Marks, a 2030 first-round pick Miami, and a 2032 future first-round pick. So again, that's kind of what the Spurs, Rockets, and Miami have to offer Phoenix right now from what's being reported lately. And so that's where, now let's look at the Suns' perspective on all this. So what we know about Phoenix, where they're at right now, is that, they do want to remain competitive. They want to still build a good team around Devin Booker. They would prefer to get a center back in any trade. However, as I've kind of gone through all 3 of those teams, the Rockets, the Spurs aren't offering up a center. The Heat do have Kel'el Ware, but again, there's no guarantee that he'd even be included in a trade for Durant. So again, it's a maybe on Ware. Also, Phoenix wants financial flexibility to be able to get under the second apron going into July 1st. That way they have a little bit more flexibility for trades, for future trades. They also want picks for either young players on good contracts or for future trades as well with those picks. So again, that's kind of what Phoenix's perspective is at, and whether they're going to get that in any of these trades with the Spurs, Rockets, or Heat, or et cetera, what other teams are out there, it remains to be seen. So I just want to kind of look at those 3 teams again, focusing on the Spurs, Rockets, and Heat, and kind of just looking for the different elements that the Suns can look at from their trade packages potentially. So from a competitiveness standpoint, having good players on the team, I would say the Rockets and Spurs here are in the lead with, getting, if they get someone from like the Spurs, someone like a Devin Vassell and Harrison Barnes, 2, starting level players in the NBA right now can be good players to complement Devin Booker. From the Rockets' side, again, if they get like Dillon Brooks and Jabari Smith Jr., or they get Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr., again, good players to automate, to keep the Suns pretty competitive. So as far as like what the Heat would be offering, though, they're not going to get, having Andrew Wiggins and like I said, Terry Rozier, those kind of players, they're not going to really be, keep you as competitive as what the Spurs and Rockets have to offer. So I'd say, again, from a competitiveness standpoint, keeping, getting some good players for this year's team, I would say the Rockets and Spurs have the advantage there. In terms of getting a center, that's going to be Miami, but only, again, if Miami includes Kel'el Ware. Again, there's been no guarantees there that Ware would be included in a package for KD. As far as current picks in this draft coming up on June 25th, I would say, again, the Rockets or Spurs win this battle here, where the Rockets can offer maybe the 10th pick, the Spurs can offer the 14th pick. Again, Miami in this year's draft can only offer the 20th pick, which is via the Warriors. And then for future picks, I would rank this situation like Rockets, Heat, and Spurs. So I say Rockets because, again, they can give Phoenix some of their own picks back if they're willing to in a trade. The Heat have a 2030 and 2032 eligible traded picks, and then the Spurs, again, I don't think they're gonna put too many future firsts in a KD trade just because they're not. Yes, they want, they may want him, but they're not going to overpay for him. If it costs a lot more, like 3 first-round picks, 4 first-round picks, I can't see San Antonio doing that. They'll just let the Rockets and the Heat kind of figure this one out as far as future capital. So again, I think that's the question that Phoenix is facing is, what kind of packages are they getting from these 3 teams? Are these 3 teams knowing that now they don't have to give up as much because this would be Durant wants to land with one of these teams? Where is the leverage kind of shifted there? So I think that's where that's the question that Phoenix is currently facing right now in terms of what packages they're getting. Right now, again, on what is today that I'm recording this on Sunday night, June 15th, I do think it's going to come down to the Spurs and Rockets unless the Miami Heat are willing to overpay, giving 3 first-round picks, et cetera, maybe also Ware in a deal. So again, that's where I think everything's at with the Kevin Durant situation. So Earlier this week, Michael Scotto of Hoops Hype reported these Philadelphia 76ers have had conversations about the second pick in the draft. However, Don Harris of News 4 San Antonio, who does have connections to the Spurs' front office, quickly shot down those rumors, saying that the Spurs are not going to move the second pick in the draft, and they are expected to draft Dylan Harper still. So again, that there was that rumor out there this past week that the Spurs and Philly were talking regarding the second pick, but again, that's just rumors, and the Spurs are not looking to move the second pick, so we can kind of stop there. And this is a no-brainer regarding the Spurs. Again, right now, I'm not sure unless it's someone like Giannis Antetokounmpo who becomes available, right? Which right now it looks like from all reporting that Giannis is at least going to start this season most likely with Milwaukee based on how the Bucks are operating. Again, if it's not for an All NBA level player, top MVP level player right now, Giannis was a top 3 candidate. Again, I don't think the Spurs should even entertain the idea of moving the second pick again based on where everything's at right now. So again, Harris shot down that rumor very quickly when it first came out that the Spurs and Philly were talking about possibly moving the second pick. Also, regarding the 14th pick, there's been two reporters who have had some information on this, and it kind of ties in maybe to the KD situation as well. So Kevin O'Connor of Yahoo said that the Spurs are looking to move the 14th pick and a current player, right now. And then also Sam Vecini of The Athletic also reported that the Spurs are looking to move the 14th pick. So again, this might be part of potentially a Durant package, because like we said, there's probably been like 14 Vassell and Barnes for Durant, or maybe if the Spurs aren't looking at Durant, or maybe looking at other deals, maybe they're looking to get like a starting level wing. Something I wrote about over on the Spot Up Shot is that if the Spurs don't get Durant and they're looking for like a starting level wing, I think that they should entertain the idea of moving the 14th pick attached with the player, a rotation player, someone like a Devin Vassell, like Harrison Barnes or Keldon Johnson. However, if it's for like a backup defensive big who's going to help on the boards and with some rim protection, I don't think the Spurs should move the 14th pick along with the player to do that. I think they should still explore those options either with the 14th pick, getting someone, trying to see if there's someone in the draft, or maybe using their non-tax mid-level exceptions to either sign a free agent or acquire a player via trade. But like when I say acquire via trade, maybe with multiple second round picks instead of having to use a first round pick. So again, that's the latest on the Spurs. The Spurs' second pick and the 14th pick being involved in trade rumors. Let's keep going. All right, so what I've been doing lately is I've been updating my rosters for all 30 NBA teams, and as I'm doing that, I'm kind of keeping tabs on upcoming free agents and also players who look like realistic trade targets. When I say realistic trade targets, I mean like players that either there's been rumors that they might be available, or it's not like the cornerstone of a franchise that we know that team's not looking to move. So again, these are players that I've been looking at, on trades and free agents kind of list, and trying to figure out who could be a more gettable player for the Spurs in this situation. Again, these are trades outside of the Kevin Durant situation, because and I will admit it's been tough to kind of focus on trades for other players because we don't really know what the Spurs are going to do with that 14th pick, again because of the Durant situation, because it's kind of unknown what's going to happen yet, because they're reportedly still in the mix for Durant. So I do want to say that I've only scouted 12 teams so far, so if there's a player who I don't mention on this list, it's because I probably haven't got to his team yet. So again, players that I'm not going to mention here who I think are good fits for the Spurs early on are players like Naz Reid or Brook Lopez, just because I haven't got to the Bucks' cap sheet nor the Minnesota Timberwolves' cap sheet. But what I want to do here, though, is I want to do like a lightning round style where I'm going to kind of throw the player's name out there and just give a quick either yes or no, or maybe explanation on why that player would fit, or maybe contract reasonings why that player wouldn't fit. And then again, if you want to read more in-depth analysis, make sure you sign up for the newsletter over at thespotupshot.com. So let's begin with the free agents. So far, not that many. I'm mainly focusing on bigs and wings right here in this conversation. So for some forwards who are 6'7" to 6'9", I found two players who would fit with the Spurs, but again, there's some reasonings why I think that San Antonio shouldn't go after those players. So the first player is Day'Ron Sharpe, 6'9", big out of Brooklyn. So the issue with him is that he is going to be a restricted free agent, which gives the Nets the potential to match a offer sheet to him. So I do think that Sharpe's market could be like in that $6 to $9 million range, but the Nets reportedly do want him back. So if that's the case, that means the Spurs or any team that has interest in Sharpe, they're going to have to overpay. So when I say overpay, it might take like 10 to 11 million a year to see if Brooklyn doesn't, match that offer sheet. So again, I think that's too risky for the Spurs, just because it ties up their cap sheet for 2 days if Sharpe were to sign offer sheet with San Antonio. The Nets have 48 hours to match, and then plus, and so what's happening though in the background is that as the Spurs are waiting for the Nets to match an offer sheet, then other free agents are getting picked up by other teams at that same time. Plus, again, if Sharp signs for like 11 million per season, that's like taking off almost the entire non-tax mid-level exception San Antonio has, which is 14.1 million. The other player who I think would be a good fit for San Antonio is Gershon Yabusele. He played with Philly this year. He's 6'8" big. So the Sixers also reportedly want him back. That's been some of the reporting. So I project his market to kind of be somewhere in like the $6 to $10 million range. He is an unrestricted free agent. So again, Philly doesn't have any say so in terms of matching offers for him. But again, $6 to $10 million takes up a big chunk of the non-tax mid-level exception. And I would just say probably wait on him just because he's not a true defensive center going to bring a lot of height. I know he's an impact player who can help out, but again, the minutes really aren't there for him because right now, as the roster stands, the Spurs would still have Harrison Barnes and Jeremy Sohan getting minutes at some of those forward spots, so it'd kind of be a minutes crunch for him to get a lot of minutes. And again, he's not really addressing a main area of need, which is like a defensive big there on the board. So again, out of the free agents, out of the 12 teams that I've written about, I only found 2 free agents in terms of those 6'7" to 6'9" forwards that would be fits for the Spurs. But again, I think that it takes a lot to get those players. Now let's look at early trade fits, bigs that are over 6'9". So initially I'd said Mark Williams at the Charlotte Hornets, but then as I started to dive into his situation, I said probably not. So let me explain why. So first of all, the Hornets kind of know what his market is because they almost got him for a lot at the trade deadline before the Los Angeles Lakers went back on that trade. So they were going to get at the time from the Lakers Dalton Connect, a former 2024 first round pick. They were going to get another future first round pick, and they were going to get a pick swap. So again, the Hornets can't expect to get that much again for Williams, but they can expect to get some pieces of that for Williams if they're going to move him in a trade. Something to note about his contract is that yes, he's going into the final year of his deal, but he only has 1 year left on his deal, and he is extension eligible. So there's still a chance that maybe the Hornets extend his contract. And then the reason why I'm not so sure he's a good fit going forward for the Spurs is that if he were to get traded to San Antonio, he would obviously be their backup center to Wemby. But is that what he's still a young player? Is that what he wants for like the next 3 to 4 years of his career? Does he want to be a backup big going forward if the Spurs were extended to a contract? And then plus he has an injury history, which is one of the reasons why the Lakers went back on that trade there. So again, I also don't think San Antonio. I think that they don't want to put as much out there for him for a backup center in terms of first round picks, etc. So again, that's why I said no right now initially on Williams. There's Kelly Olynyk out of the Pelicans. He's not going to solve the Spurs' defensive issues off the bench, in terms of rebounding and being a defensive big, but he would bring some dynamics on the offensive end, especially with his playmaking, his shooting, and his passing. But however, his contract is the big issue here, where he's in the final year of his deal, which is $13.4 million. But the issue with that is that if you want to acquire him, you likely have to either give up a good rotation player, someone like a Harrison Barnes or a Keldon Johnson, or you have to take him into your non-tax mid-level exception, which is using pretty much all of that exception up, so you can't go to, you can't use that exception anymore to go find other free agents out there for like wings or an actual backup center. So again, that's why I'd say stay away from Olynyk, even though I think he could be, traded for maybe like 2 second-round picks with the Pelicans. Next up is Daniel Gafford, a big from the Dallas Mavericks. So him I have as a maybe. So here, let me explain why. He is entering the final year of his contract, and he is extension eligible with Dallas. So that's something to note. However, the Mavs have a lot of forwards and centers now on their roster. They're going to have, obviously, Anthony Davis. They're going to have Derek Lively the second still. Plus, they're about to add in the front court Cooper Flagg, the number 1 pick in the draft coming up. So, again, does Dallas want to look for an extension with him? Probably not. Again, we don't know right now at this point. But I think that his price, though, because he's a very he's a good player to add on a team right now. I think that it's going to cost it would cost something like the 14th pick in the draft or maybe a future first for him, despite him being in the final year of his contract, at least until February. Then by February, maybe you can include some second round picks for him, and then also. Contract-wise, because I think his salary is a little bit more than the non-tax mid-level exception, so you'd probably have to move either Keldon Johnson or Harrison Barnes for Gafford. But again, I don't think it hurts the Spurs to call the Mavs and just kind of just see what they would want for Gafford. Again, I think Gafford would be a good fit, and so he's more of a maybe for me. I have Jakob Poeltl from the Toronto Raptors, a former Spur as well. I'd say no on him just because of here's some of the reasons. One, his salary is pretty large. It's at $19.5 million for the next 2 years. He's going to be playing the backup center position. So do you want to pay your backup center $20 million a year? Plus, we don't. Again, the Raptors, they're in no urgent need to move him right now. Right now he'd be their starting center, so there's no reason you're going to have to probably overpay to move him from Toronto. And then not only that, you're going to have to lose rotation players to get Poeltl, which is like someone like Keldon Johnson or Harrison Barnes to make the contracts work. So again, Poeltl, I would say no. And then finally, the last player is Lauri Markkanen. I don't remember his height, but anyway, he's a big, obviously, from Utah. Right now, I'd probably say no from Utah's perspective. So, and let me explain why. So, the Jazz, I think, would only say yes on Markkanen right now if the Spurs were talking to them, if San Antonio was willing to include the second pick for maybe Utah's fifth pick plus Lowry. So, and again, based on the reporting, we don't see any kind of trades right now that the Spurs would look at to move the second overall pick. So again, that's probably the non-starter. But now, my initial package was this. Do the Spurs want to move the 14th pick? Maybe like 3 future firsts, a pick swap, Vassell and Keldon. Maybe that's in the Jazz look at, but we just saw what happened on Sunday where the Memphis Grizzlies agreed with the Orlando Magic to acquire the Magic acquired Desmond Bane, a non-All-Star, whereas again Markkanen is a former All-Star, for 4 unprotected first-round picks and a pick swap. So again, Bane's trade for him even being like a non-All-Star, but being a very good player, obviously in this league, has kind of set the market in terms of trades. As are you willing to give maybe 4 unprotected firsts and a pick swap? And again, by just in terms of what that player has done in the league, Lowry has been an All-Star at least so far in his career. So it might take just as much as what was offered for Bane, or even more. So again, that's where I think that you have to really overpay if you're San Antonio to get Markkanen right now. If you're not willing to include that second pick, and like I said, right now I don't think that they're willing to include the second pick, considering that Markkanen's on a good multi-year contract there in Utah. So again, I think that it's going to take a lot to get Markkanen. Finally, I want to look at some players like in that 6'7" to 6'9" range. Again, tradable players. So first is Robert Williams with the Portland Trailblazers. So his situation is where he's similar to Kelly Olynyk. Again, I think he would help with the boards. He would help with rim defense, but his contract is the issue. So he's making $13.2 million in his final season coming up. In his final season, but he has an injury history. Obviously, he's always on the injured list year after year after year. Plus, for the Spurs, they're having to use pretty much all of the non-tax middle level exception by taking his contract into that exception. And then, I don't think it's going to cost too much to get someone like Williams, maybe like 2 or 3 second round picks, depending on the time that the deal is made. So again, Williams is like a backup option if you can't find any players, should I say, with the non-tax middle level exception of $14.1 million. Another player who the Spurs would probably have to overpay for is Herb Jones out of the New Orleans Pelicans. So Jones does have 2 years left on his deal. He's also extension eligible, so this whole conversation could be pointless in a few weeks if he signs an extension with New Orleans. I think that a lot of it depends on how Joe Dumars, the new running the Pelicans front office, how he kind of sees Jones. How does he evaluate him? And so my initial package before the Bane news was Jones for Barnes, the 14th pick, and a future first. But with the Bane trade, I think now like the Pelicans at minimum they're asking for like 3 first-round picks for Herb Jones. So again, either way, if the Spurs or any team wants Herb Jones, they're gonna have to definitely overpay for him. PJ Washington at the Mavs. I've seen reporting that the Mavs do not want to move him, even though he's in the final year of his deal at $14.1 million. And similar to Herb Jones, where he could sign a contract extension with the Mavs this offseason. So again, maybe he's not even eligible to be traded in a few months. I would say, just looking at trade-wise, I would say the Mavs probably want a first for him. So that'd probably be like the 14th pick in this year's draft. And then also, does Dallas, want someone like Barnes or Keldon to make the salaries work? And then, so again, I think with PJ Washington, it doesn't hurt the Spurs to at least call Dallas's front office to kind of just gauge, what would it take to get him. Again, that's if the KD trade for the Spurs doesn't work out. Next up is a player who I've mentioned multiple times here on the Spotted Pod, Cam Johnson of the Brooklyn Nets. So I know that myself and Colin Reed, we talked about him in our last episode a week ago. So again, he's under contract for 2 more seasons. There's been reporting that the Nets do want a top 10 pick for him. Now, the Spurs don't have a top 10 pick, but they do have the number 14 pick, so it's, just a few slots down. So again, my question is, would, and it goes back to what Colin said last week, would Brooklyn, let's just say that, they've looked at all their options and no one's giving them a top 10 pick for Cam Johnson. So would they be okay with taking some package like Keldon Johnson, the 14th pick, and a 2030 pick swap. Is that enough to get a deal done? So again, this really depends too on the KD situation. Whether or not the Spurs have to, whether or not they land KD. Obviously, that 14th pick may not be available. But again, if they don't get KD, then I think again it doesn't hurt for the Spurs to call Cam Johnson and kind of just figure out what does Brooklyn want for him. Coming up around draft time. The final player is Trey Murphy III out of the Pelicans. Again, to get Murphy III, just like Herb Jones, you're going to probably have to pay a lot to get him, overpay to get him from New Orleans, even if they were willing to move him. So here's why. He's under contract, under a very good contract for like the next 4 seasons, similar to Devin Vassell's contract. Initially, about a week ago when I wrote this article, I had said Vassell, 2 first-round picks and 1 pick swap for Murphy. I had already said then that I think the Pelicans automatically say no. But now with this Desmond Bane news, I think now the Pelicans probably going to ask for 4 first and a pick swap, something similar to Bane, or as I mentioned then, something like the Mikal Bridges trade where the Knicks gave up 5 first-round picks for Bridges. So again, it really depends too on how Joe Dumars running the Pelicans front office now, where he sees Murphy and the Pelicans' future. But again, either way for Murphy or Herb Jones, I think that again, any team that wants those players, they have to really overpay for either player to try to pry them from New Orleans, because the Pelicans just saw that Desmond Bane, again, a wing, a good shooting wing, who's never even made an All-Star team, just got four unprotected first and a pick swap. So again, Bane's trade has kind of set the market in terms of the trade market for some of these wings out there, and that's why now these organizations, they don't have to feel pressured to move some of these players on multi-year contracts like a Trey Murphy III or a Herb Jones, because what they just saw what Bane does out there. All right, so we'll see what happens now with this whole KD trade situation going forward. If the Spurs do acquire him within the next few days, I'll probably do an emergency episode, kind of just get my thoughts on the trade. If they don't, obviously I won't. I would say I'll probably have one more episode right before the draft. I know it's on the 25th, Wednesday, but it could either be Sunday, Monday, or Tuesday that week, just because I want to try to get as much information in terms of the trade rumors that are out there. Maybe by that time we know what the Spurs, the 14th pick, maybe it gets moved into trade, or maybe I'll talk about some of the prospects. But again, I'm going to probably wait right before the deadline to do my next episode. Not the deadline, the draft, to do my next episode. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode of the Spot Up Pod. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a rating on your favorite podcast apps and our YouTube channel. The Spot Up Pod is recorded and produced by Paul Garcia. The music for this episode was written by Vincent Garcia and Paul Garcia. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.